The Elysian Concorde drifted through the cold vastness of space, its massive hull creaking ever so slightly as the hum of its engines filled the silence. Relkan, the communications officer, sat hunched over his console, his sharp eyes scanning wave after wave of encrypted signals. It had been an uneventful journey, just as most deep space expeditions were. The crew was restless, their minds numbed by the monotony of a routine mission. Delivering supplies to an outlying system, then moving on to the next. That is, until the signal came. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, buried beneath the usual noise of deep space radio waves. Relkan's fingers flew over the console as he adjusted the filters, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. The signal seemed familiar, like something from a time long past, a relic from before the galaxy had forgotten humanity. He keyed in a command, isolating the signal's frequency, and a recognizable pattern began to emerge. Old Earth code, the same long-abandoned encryption used by humanity's long-lost predecessors. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. "Captain, you need to see this." Relkan's voice was steady, but there was an urgency behind it. He glanced toward the bridge where Captain Vale, an experienced leader who had seen more than his fair share of space anomalies, was currently reviewing some outdated star maps. Vale didn't hesitate. He stormed to the communications station, a stern look on his face. "What is it?" Relkan didn't waste time explaining. He just pushed a few buttons and the signal played across the screen. "This is Earth. Distress signal. Active. Emergency protocol. Code 7A. It was fragmented, but the words were unmistakable. Earth, a planet that had been lost to time and myth. There were stories, of course, whispers that humanity had once dominated the galaxy, that they'd spread their reach far beyond the stars, only to suddenly vanish without a trace. Some believed the galaxy was better off without them. Others thought they had simply destroyed themselves. But the truth remained a mystery. Until now. Val's face remained unreadable, but Relkan could see the tension in his jaw, the subtle tightening of his fists. "Get us a fix on that signal," Vale ordered. Relkan's fingers flew across the keys, his mind racing. "Aye, Captain. It's coming from Earth's system. Sol. Direct coordinates locked. But it doesn't make sense. Earth hasn't been active in over 200 years. Vale didn't flinch. Plot a course. Now. The crew was skeptical. They had learned the hard way that space was filled with anomalies, things that shouldn't exist or were just remnants of lost civilizations. But Earth, it was a name spoken of in only the most distant, speculative terms. There was nothing left there. No colonies, no civilizations, just an ancient, lifeless rock floating in the cold, empty dark. Or so they thought. The Elysian Concorde adjusted its course, heading toward the edge of the galaxy's heart. The gravity of their situation was sinking in. Whatever this signal was, it had been waiting. And now it was too late to ignore. As the ship moved closer to Earth's system, a faint hum vibrated through the hull. The onboard systems began to flicker, a low warning pulse echoing through the comms. "Captain," Relkan called out, his voice tight. "The signal's stronger now. But it's not just a distress call." Vale turned to face him, an expression of suspicion clouding his features. "What do you mean?" "It's like a warning," Relkan said, swallowing hard. "Someone, or something, is waiting for us." The hum grew louder, more insistent. The Elysian Concorde was now locked on a course that would bring it deep into the heart of Earth's ancient system. Whatever they were about to uncover, one thing was certain. The past was no longer dead. It was coming back. And it was hungry. The Elysian Concorde dropped out of warp, its sleek, advanced hull groaning under the strain of deceleration as it entered Earth's outer orbit. The view from the bridge was a sight that would haunt every crew member's mind for the rest of their lives. Sol system in all its stark, haunting beauty. Earth, the cradle of humanity, had always been a distant, almost mythical place. The legends spoke of a thriving world full of life, once a vibrant home to billions, now just an empty shell, shrouded in mystery. No one knew what had happened to the planet, but over time, it became less of a story and more of a myth. Some thought the human race had destroyed itself. Others believed the planet had simply been abandoned, forgotten by the stars. Now, as the Elysian Concorde drifted toward its desolate surface, the air on the bridge felt thick with uncertainty. Captain Val's voice broke the silence. Status report. Relkin was glued to his console, running every scan he could. The system seems intact. Everything looks normal on the surface. No signs of large-scale activity. No signals from any colonies or military assets. But he hesitated, eyes flicking across his screen. Something's off. There's power emanating from beneath the surface. Huge amounts of it. Vale frowned, glancing at the view screen. The Earth below was not the barren rock he had expected. It was alive, though its pulse was faint, as if the heart of the planet had been asleep for centuries. "Do we have a lock on the distress beacon's origin?" Vale asked, his voice sharp. Relkin nodded. "Coordinates locked. The signal is coming from a remote region, what used to be known as Antarctica. There's a large, abandoned research station there. The signal's still active, and there's an unexpected energy surge coming from deep below the surface. Get a team ready. We're going down." The shuttle that would carry them to Earth's surface was eerily quiet as it descended. Outside the windows, the planet loomed, a ghostly, weathered orb, its oceans and continents obscured by swirling clouds. The desolation was palpable. There were no signs of life, no signs of humanity at all, just the vast, unbroken stillness of a forgotten world. The shuttle landed near the coordinates provided by Relkan. The landing site was a rocky, frozen expanse at the southernmost pole of the planet, where the temperature dipped to lethal extremes, and the winds howled like ancient, forgotten spirits. The research station, buried beneath layers of ice and snow, looked like a relic from another time. Its structure was weathered, its edges frayed, but its core seemed untouched by time. As they stepped out into the bitter cold, a strange sense of unease settled over the crew. There was a stillness here, an unnatural silence, as if the world itself were holding its breath. "This place, it's dead," Lieutenant Kira murmured, her voice barely rising above the wind. "But how?" Vale shot her a glance. "We'll find out soon enough. Stay sharp." They entered the station through a sealed hatch, which groaned open as the atmosphere inside the facility was reignited. The air inside was stale, yet breathable. Frozen dust swirled in the light of their flashlights as they moved deeper into the complex. Everything inside was covered in ice, but the power grid was still operational. The faint glow of lights flickered in the darkened hallways, casting long, eerie shadows. As they moved deeper, they found the station's control room, dimly lit, but still functioning. On a cracked terminal, an old, rusted console hummed with life. Relkan rushed to it, his fingers dancing across the keys as he booted up the ancient system. "What is this place?" Vale muttered, glancing around at the sterile, military-grade equipment. "A research station. Why would they leave it here?" Relkan paused, his eyes widening as he scanned the logs. "It's not just a research station, Captain. It's a military facility." He turned the screen toward Vale. The data was fragmented, but one thing was clear. Earth had prepared for war. A war that never came. The final log entry, dated over 200 years ago, flickered onto the screen. A message, delivered with chilling clarity. "Protocol Aegis activated. All systems on standby. Awaiting further instructions." Val's stomach tightened. What in the hell is Protocol Aegis? Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The power flickered, then surged. A low, resonant hum echoed through the station. The walls vibrated as a deep, subterranean sound rose from beneath the ice. Something massive, was waking. Relkin's face turned pale as the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. "We need to leave." Now. But before they could react, the station's airlock slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. The hum grew louder. The ground shook harder. And then, deep beneath them, they heard it. An unmistakable sound. The sound of something enormous stirring. The Elysian Concord wasn't just about to uncover the secrets of Earth. It was about to awaken something terrifying. The airlock's mechanical clank echoed ominously in the narrow hallway, sealing the crew inside the research station. The low hum from beneath the station grew in intensity, vibrating through the walls and into their bones. Relkin's fingers shook as he tried to access the station's emergency systems, his breath shallow as a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. "We've got to get out of here," Lieutenant Kira said, her voice taut with urgency as she moved to the control panel, trying to override the lockdown. "This place is coming alive. We're not supposed to be here." Vale glanced over at Kira, his face set in hard lines. He understood the gravity of the situation. They had come to investigate a signal, not to trigger whatever was buried beneath this forsaken place. But it was too late to turn back now. The rumbling grew louder. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows across the control room, the low hum vibrating in their bones like the sound of an ancient war drum. "Relkin, what's happening?" Vale demanded, his voice sharp. He knew something had gone horribly wrong. The power surges, the jamming of their systems, it was all connected to whatever was buried under the ice. But what exactly was it? And why was it waking up now? Relkan was silent for a long moment as he typed furiously, his eyes scanning the data that appeared on the screen. Finally, he turned, his face pale and drawn. "I don't think it's a coincidence, Captain," Relkan said, his voice low, his words weighted with dread. "The signal we picked up, it wasn't a distress call. It was a warning. The distress beacon was just the first step in an automated chain. It triggered the activation of something called Protocol Aegis." Vale stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "What's Protocol Aegis?" Relkin swallowed hard. "It's a fail-safe, Captain. An emergency protocol created by Earth's last government, back before the Cataclysm Wars. They never meant for it to be activated. Earth, humanity, was too dangerous. So, they sealed everything away. Everything, including their most powerful military assets." Val's brow furrowed. "Powerful military assets? You mean weapons?" "Worse," Relkin whispered. "Humanity's last line of defense wasn't just weapons. It was an entire army, one designed for total war. An unstoppable force that could cleanse the galaxy of any threat. Earth never intended to use them unless absolutely necessary. And now they've been awakened." A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the distant thrum of the energy surge beneath them. The hum of power echoed through the walls, and the floor beneath their feet trembled again, as if the very ground were alive, breathing with anticipation. "We need to leave," Kira said, her voice rising in urgency. "Now. This place is a tomb, and whatever's down there, it's not meant for us to see. We triggered something we don't understand, and it's coming for us." But before Vel could respond, a series of alarms blared throughout the station, drowning out her words. The lights dimmed, and then a loud metallic clang reverberated through the walls, followed by the unmistakable sound of massive machinery coming to life. Suddenly, the floor shook violently beneath their feet, sending everyone stumbling. Vel grabbed onto a nearby pillar to steady himself, his eyes scanning the room. "We don't have much time," he said, voice hard with resolve. "Relkan, what's the fastest way out of here?" Relkan quickly keyed in commands on his console. "There's an emergency lift shaft that leads to a secondary exit tunnel," he said, his voice tight. "It's our best shot. We have to move. Now." Kira was already at the door, her weapon raised as she scanned the dark hall outside. "I'll take point," she said, her tone professional, even though her pulse was racing. She didn't trust whatever was happening here, and she wasn't about to let it catch them off guard. The crew moved quickly, retracing their steps through the narrow, darkened hallways of the station. Every corner seemed darker than the last, every shadow more menacing. The rumbling continued, and it was no longer just distant noise. It was as if something was rising from deep beneath the station, something huge and unfathomable. They reached the emergency lift shaft, its doors still intact but locked tight. Relken worked quickly, inputting the override code. The panel sparked to life, and the doors groaned open. "Move," Vale barked, ushering the crew inside. They piled into the lift, the doors slamming shut behind them with a metallic thud. But just as the lift began to descend, the station's lights flickered again, and then went out entirely. In the total darkness, the hum beneath them grew louder, closer, and then, from deep within the ice, they heard it. A deep, resonant growl, a sound that shook the very foundations of the station. Something ancient, something alive, was rising, and it was coming for them. The lift shot downward, the crew's breath shallow with fear, as the ground beneath their feet seemed to move and shift with the awakening of something far older than humanity itself. The emergency lift descended with dizzying speed, the walls vibrating as though the very earth beneath them was shifting. The oppressive hum below grew louder, almost deafening, as though a sleeping titan had stirred from its slumber. The crew remained silent, each one lost in their own thoughts, aware of the rising tension but unsure what to expect when the lift doors would finally open. The descent seemed to take an eternity. Every second felt like an hour as the tremors from beneath them grew more violent. The lights flickered again, casting the crew into brief moments of complete darkness, and each time the hum grew in intensity. Val's fingers clenched around the edge of the lift's console, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. What was down there? What had Earth hidden beneath its icy crust? And why had it been kept dormant for so long? When the lift finally reached its destination, the doors parted with a groan of resistance, and they spilled into an underground tunnel, illuminated by emergency lighting that barely lit the path ahead. The air smelled stale, but not dead. There was a faint tang of machinery, of rust and old technology, that still pulsed with some distant life. The crew quickly filed out, weapons at the ready. "It's not much farther," Relken said, his voice barely audible over the growling hum beneath them. "The exit tunnel leads directly to the surface. We should be able to—" A deafening crash interrupted him. The ground beneath them lurched violently, and the tunnel shook as if something immense was moving just below them. A loud metallic screech echoed from somewhere deeper in the facility, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. "Get ready," Vale shouted, raising his weapon. "Whatever it is, it's coming for us." There was no time to second-guess. The crew sprinted down the corridor, their boots clattering against the metal floor. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, and the hum from below seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeats. The deeper they went, the more they felt the weight of the ancient power that had been slumbering beneath Earth's surface. The tunnel ahead curved sharply, and as they rounded the bend, the source of the rumbling became horrifyingly clear. The genetic legions. At first, they were only silhouettes in the shadows. But as the crew pressed forward, the figures became more distinct, massive humanoid shapes, moving with terrifying precision and grace, their features hidden behind faceless helmets. Their exoskeletal suits shimmered with a metallic sheen, but there was nothing sleek or modern about them. These were not your average soldiers. These were engineered warriors, designed for one purpose: total annihilation. There were dozens of them. No, hundreds, standing in perfect formation, as if they had been waiting for centuries. Their bodies were augmented beyond recognition, their muscles rippling beneath the dark armor as they flexed, ready to spring into action. Their eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with an eerie cold light. The hum deepened into a deep bass thrum, resonating through the walls and shaking the ground. Then a voice, low, mechanical, and chilling, rumbled through the corridor, emanating from the very walls themselves. Unit 7A. Legion Protocol initiated. All assets active. Primary directive. Engage. The ground trembled again as the first of the Legionnaires stepped forward, their massive boots pounding against the floor with such force it felt like a shockwave rippling through the station. Vale instinctively raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking. These soldiers weren't just trained warriors. They were biologically enhanced, the pinnacle of humanity's terrifying potential for warfare. There was no mercy in their movements, no hesitation. Just an unyielding, cold drive to exterminate anything that threatened their creators. We can't fight them, Kira muttered under her breath, eyes wide. There are too many of them. They'll kill us all. Vale met her gaze, a hard resolve settling in his chest. We don't have a choice. We need to get to the surface. Now. Relkin's voice cracked through the tense air, his fingers typing frantically into his console. Captain, I'm accessing the emergency evacuation route, but the system is partially locked down. I'll need more time to breach the code. Before Vel could respond, one of the Legionnaires, massive and armored, raised its arm, and a low hum emitted from the gauntlet on its wrist. A plasma blade ignited, glowing a fierce blue as it crackled with energy. The Legionnaire's voice, harsh and mechanical, boomed in their direction. Intruders identified. Protocol. Eradicate. With a sudden, terrifying speed, the Legionnaire lunged forward, the plasma blade slashing through the air in an arc. Vale instinctively dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade's searing edge as it cut through the wall, sending sparks and debris flying. The crew scattered, instinctively ducking and dodging the swarms of Legionnaires as they advanced. The air was thick with the buzz of energy weapons charging, the metallic clank of armored feet pounding against the floor. Kira fired first, her shots piercing the air, but they seemed to do little more than momentarily stagger the attackers. The Legionnaires didn't flinch. They didn't care. They're unstoppable, Kira shouted, her voice trembling with disbelief. Vale's mind raced. This was no ordinary fight. They couldn't win here, not without reinforcements, not without something more than mere firepower. And as the Legionnaires continued their relentless advance, Vale understood one brutal truth. The war for Earth had already begun, and they were caught right in the middle of it. The corridor was chaos. Plasma blades hummed through the air with a lethal crackle, leaving scorch marks on the metal walls. The Legionnaires advanced without hesitation, their heavy footsteps reverberating through the tunnel like the drumbeats of an execution. Each movement they made was deliberate, calculated, precise. There was no fear in them, no second guessing. They were machines of war, designed to eradicate anything in their path. Val's heart raced as he fired at the nearest Legionnaire, his shots bouncing off its reinforced armor. The creature didn't even flinch. Kira moved with a fluidity born of years of combat training, her rifle blazing, but even her expert shots failed to penetrate the Legionnaire's exoskeletal suits. "We're not getting through them," Kira shouted, ducking behind a metal column as another Legionnaire charged toward them, swinging its plasma blade. The air hissed with the heat of it. "We need to fall back." But there was nowhere to fall back to. The tunnel behind them was a dead end, the only way forward through the advancing army of genetically engineered soldiers. Relkin scrambled at his console, his fingers flying across the keys as the team scattered, trying to find cover. His face was pale with fear, sweat dripping from his brow. The evacuation route is almost breached, but it's going to take a few more minutes. We don't have that long. Val's mind raced as he scanned the situation. The Legionnaires were too many, too well-equipped, and their relentless, methodical approach made it clear that they weren't just soldiers. They were hunters. The fact that they had remained dormant for centuries only meant one thing. They had been designed to wipe out anything they deemed a threat to humanity. And now, after 200 years, they were awake, and they didn't care who or what stood in their way. "We need a distraction," Vale muttered under his breath, his eyes flicking to the walls of the tunnel. The Legionnaires were closing in from all sides, but their mechanical precision left a fatal flaw. They weren't alive. They didn't think like humans. They'd followed orders. Val's gaze landed on a massive steel door just ahead. It looked old, but still functional, the potential point of leverage. He turned to Kira, who was still firing at the advancing forces. "Kira, get the team to the door. We need to hold them off long enough for Relkin to finish that breach." Kira nodded without hesitation, taking a moment to glance at the team, and then sprinting toward the door. The rest of the crew followed in close formation, keeping up a steady barrage of fire while retreating toward the last remaining piece of cover. "Relkan," Vale barked. "Can you finish that override?" "I'm trying," Relkan shouted back, his voice rising with panic. The walls shook again as another surge of energy from the underground legion reverberated through the tunnel, nearly knocking him off his feet. "The system is corrupted. I'm bypassing the protocols, but I'm almost out of time." The legionnaires were relentless, now just meters away. Their pace quickened, and Vale could see the first of them readying its weapon, preparing to charge. Desperation clawed at his mind, but he didn't let it show. "Don't stop," he ordered, his voice as cold as the steel walls around them. "Hold them off. We're not dying here." The team took up positions near the steel door, bracing themselves for the final push. Kira was at the front, moving with the precision of a soldier who knew the value of every second. She planted explosives along the door's frame, securing them quickly as Vale and the others kept up the fire. "Explosives set," Kira called out, backing away. "Everyone, brace yourselves," Vale shouted as he took cover behind a column. The legionnaires were almost on them now, only a few meters away, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. The explosion was deafening. The metal door was blown off its hinges with a tremendous crash, sending shards of steel flying through the air. The force of the blast sent the first line of legionnaires stumbling backward, but they didn't fall. They didn't even pause. But that was enough. The door, now blasted open, led into a cavernous chamber beyond. The team surged through the breach, ducking and dodging the incoming fire from the legionnaires. The chamber was a vast, empty expanse, filled with rows upon rows of old, rusted machinery. There was no time to assess what it was, only time to run. Relkin's voice echoed through the comms. "I've got it. The evacuation route is open. It's just ahead." Relkin's words were the sweetest sound Vale had heard all day, but they didn't have much time. The legionnaires were still coming, and now they had them cornered. "We move now," Vale shouted. "Everyone, go." They sprinted forward, the sound of mechanical footsteps thundering behind them. The evacuation tunnel loomed ahead, a narrow escape, but only if they reached it in time. The air seemed to thicken as the legionnaires pursued relentlessly, but Vale wasn't about to let them die here. They were close, so close, when another blast of energy slammed into the ground beside them, sending a shockwave that threw them off balance. The tunnel ahead was just within reach, but the doorway was closing rapidly. Kira was the first to dive through, followed by the others. Vale turned one last time, locking eyes with the oncoming legion. They were too many, but he had to believe they could make it. "Go," he shouted, and with a final push, they made it through the doorway, just as it slammed shut behind them, sealing off the horrors of Earth's past. But deep beneath them, the legionnaires continued to stir. The tunnel beyond the door was narrow and claustrophobic, the walls slick with condensation as they ran deeper into the facility. The faint echo of their footsteps was swallowed by the thick stone walls, creating an eerie silence that only added to the tension. The light from their flashlights barely illuminated the path ahead, but they could all feel the growing urgency in their chests. The legionnaires might have been stopped for now, but the rumbling vibrations beneath their feet told a different story. Relkin's voice crackled over the comms. "The system's barely holding. I don't know how much longer I can keep the evacuation doors open. We need to move faster." Val's heart raced as he led the team down the narrow corridor. Every second counted. "How far?" "Relkan," he barked, his voice urgent. "Less than 300 meters. Just keep going." Relkan's voice was tight with strain. The team moved in a tight formation, weapons at the ready, alert for any sign of pursuit. The air felt heavy, as if something ancient and powerful was still watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Vale glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see the Legionnaires in hot pursuit. But there was nothing. The tunnel behind them was eerily still. It was as if the very ground beneath them had quieted, holding its breath for the inevitable. "How long before they get through the breach?" Kira asked, her voice low but sharp, still on edge. Vale didn't look back, but he knew the answer. Not long enough. The tunnel began to slope downward, and the cold air grew even more biting. The further they went, the more oppressive the silence became. Even the hum of the facility's ancient power systems seemed to fade, replaced by the growing sense that they were being drawn deeper into a void. Finally, ahead of them, the faint glow of an emergency exit lit up the end of the tunnel, and the team accelerated their pace. They had no choice but to keep going. The evacuation doors were their only way out. Relkan's voice came again, laced with panic. "I can't get the doors to open. Something's locking them down. Something's blocking the override." Val's blood ran cold. "Damn it, Relkan, can you bypass it?" "I'm trying. It's an encrypted lock. Whoever built this place, they didn't want anyone getting out." Kira swore under her breath. "Great. We're about to be buried alive." The team reached the door, but it remained sealed, unmoving, a steel wall that refused to budge. Relkan was already at the control panel, his fingers flying over the console, but it was clear the situation was quickly spiraling out of their control. "Keep moving," Vale shouted, grabbing Kira by the arm. "We don't stop until that door is open." The ground beneath them shuddered again, more violently this time. The distant sound of heavy, thunderous footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Someone was coming. "We don't have time for this," Kira snapped, her eyes scanning the shadows behind them. "They're almost here. We're not making it if this door doesn't open." Relkan's breath quickened as he typed desperately into the control panel. "It's no good. I'm not getting through. They blocked me out completely." Then, the rumbling stopped. The silence fell like a blade. For a heartbeat, it was as if the whole world had held its breath, waiting. And then, a sound like 1,000 war drums erupted from behind them, the unmistakable pounding of Legionnaires' feet, synchronized and relentless. "They're here," Kira shouted. "Get ready, Captain." Vale didn't need another warning. With no other option, he turned, his hand gripping his weapon. He motioned for the team to take cover in the shadows, even as the heavy footsteps of the Legionnaires grew closer. The door was their only hope, but with every passing moment, the sound of the approaching soldiers was deafening. Val's pulse hammered in his ears. He knew they were running out of time, and running out of options. Then, just as the first of the Legionnaires emerged from the darkness, Relkan's voice broke through the growing chaos. "I got it. The override code." The door groaned as it slowly began to open, but it was too slow. The Legionnaires were nearly on them, their massive forms silhouetted in the dim light. "Go. Now," Vale shouted. Kira led the charge, diving through the widening gap in the door just as the first blast of plasma fire tore through the air. Vale was right behind her, followed closely by the rest of the team. The door was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through, and the sound of the Legionnaires charging, their voices now joined in a chilling, synchronized command to terminate the intruders, filled the air. As the last of the crew passed through, Vale slammed his fist on the control panel, and the door slid shut with a final, metallic clang. For a moment, everything went silent. They were outside, standing on the frozen ground of Earth's southern pole. The air was frigid, cutting through them like ice. The storm overhead had intensified, snow and ice swirling in a violent maelstrom. But the true danger was still there, beneath them, beyond the door, within the facility. The Legionnaires would not stop. They would not rest until they had completed their directive. Vale stared at the towering structure that loomed behind them. Earth was lost, and they had just woken up its last defenders. The frigid wind cut through Val's layers of clothing as he and his team staggered across the icy surface, their breath forming clouds in the bitter cold. The evacuation tunnel had led them to the surface, but they were far from safe. Behind them, the station loomed like a titan, its silhouette barely visible through the swirling snow. The rumbling from beneath the ground hadn't ceased. It had only intensified. Vale stood still for a moment, the weight of their situation settling in. The Legionnaires were still inside the facility, and he knew that would only be temporary. They were a force unlike any he had seen before, beyond human, beyond anything Earth had ever faced. They would adapt, hunt, and eliminate. The world of the living had been sealed for 2 centuries, and now humanity's nightmares had been unleashed. Kira was the first to speak, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "What now, Captain? We're exposed out here. The Legionnaires can't be far behind, and they'll probably have the whole station to back them up." Vale didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing. He had no plan, no backup. They had made it out, but barely. He had to think fast if they were going to survive this. They couldn't fight the Legionnaires, not with the meager weapons and supplies they had left. They had no choice but to get as far away from the facility as possible, but that was easier said than done in this frozen wasteland. Relkin, still breathing heavily from the sprint, finally found his voice. "We need to contact command. Warn them. Tell them what we found." He was right. If anyone had any chance of stopping the Legionnaires, it was the Federation. But they were deep in uncharted territory, far from any regular supply routes, and their communication systems were down. They had no immediate way of getting in contact with anyone. Kira cursed under her breath. "Do we even have a comm unit that works?" she asked. Relkin was already pulling a small device from his pack, his fingers shaking as he examined it. "The satellite relay is functional, but the signal's weak. We'll need to climb to higher ground to get a stronger signal, and even then, it might take hours, if we can even get a connection at all." Vale surveyed the horizon. The snowstorm made visibility nearly impossible, but the icy cliffs rising to their left could provide the elevation they needed. It was a risk. Climbing the cliffs would expose them to the elements, but the storm might also obscure them from any immediate pursuit. "Climbing the cliffs is our best shot," Vale said finally, turning to Kira and the rest of the team. "We need to make it to the top. That's where the relay will be the strongest. If we don't get a message out, we're dead anyway." Relkin gave a terse nod, securing the comm device in his bag. Kira was already moving, pulling her pack tighter over her shoulders and setting her jaw with determination. "Let's go," she said. "We've got no time to waste." The group moved swiftly, pushing against the wind, their progress slow but steady. The snowstorm wasn't just an obstacle. It was their only advantage. The Legionnaires might have been designed for warfare, but they weren't built for survival in conditions like this. At least for now, the elements would give them a fighting chance. After what felt like hours, they reached the base of the cliffs. The wind whipped harder now, biting at their exposed skin as they began their ascent. Vale led the way, finding footholds in the frozen rock, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Every step was a battle against the harsh conditions, but they had no choice. "Keep moving," Vale called out. "We can't afford to stop." But then came the sound that made every hair on Val's neck stand on end. The unmistakable hum of energy weapons charging, faint at first, but growing louder. "Behind us," Kira shouted, spinning around, her gun raised. Vale whirled just in time to see the first of the Legionnaires, its massive frame silhouetted against the storm. More followed. 2, 3, then a dozen, emerging from the swirling snow like phantoms. The Legionnaires had adapted, and they were relentless. "Fall back," Vale yelled, his heart pounding in his chest. The team moved in a coordinated retreat, scrambling toward the cliffs, but the Legionnaires were closing in fast. Vale fired, but his shots only bounced harmlessly off their armor. Kira, too, fired with deadly precision, but they couldn't stop them. Then, as if the storm itself had heard their plight, something shifted. A rumble, almost imperceptible at first, began to emanate from deep beneath the ice. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, this time with an unnatural force. It wasn't the echo of the Legionnaires, it was something else. Something much older. Vale didn't know whether to take cover or keep running, but instinct kicked in. He ordered the team to continue climbing, urgency in his voice. They were already too far from the facility to turn back, and the Legionnaires were too close. And then, as the team reached the halfway point, the ground exploded beneath them. A blinding light erupted from deep within the ice. Powerful, incandescent. Something alive had just awakened. The team staggered, nearly thrown off the cliff by the shockwave. Val's heart hammered in his chest. There was no mistaking it now. The real war was just beginning. The explosion sent a shockwave rippling through the frozen landscape, knocking Vale and his team off their feet. Snow and ice sprayed into the air like shrapnel, and the ground beneath them buckled as if the earth itself was coming alive. Val's body hit the cold rock with a brutal thud, and for a moment, everything blurred. His head swam with the impact, the sharp scent of burning ozone filling the air. The snowstorm had intensified, the wind howling even louder now, but the ground trembled with a new force, a deep, resonating pulse from beneath the ice, vibrating in Val's bones. It wasn't the Legionnaires. This was something else. "Get up." Kira's voice cut through the chaos, harsh and urgent. "We need to move." Vale blinked, struggling to shake off the disorientation. The storm raged around them, but he could hear the unmistakable sound of something massive stirring deep beneath the Earth's crust. The sky above was filled with a dim, sickly light, a flash that didn't belong to any storm, a light that pulsed with a strange, almost alien energy. The ground rumbled again, more violently now. A massive fissure cracked open just to their right, sending chunks of rock and ice tumbling into the depths. Vale scrambled to his feet, his hands slick with sweat despite the cold, and he turned to see Kira already on her feet, her eyes scanning the horizon with frantic intensity. "What the hell is happening?" she demanded, her voice trembling with disbelief. This isn't natural." Relkin, who had managed to get up just in time, was clutching his side, his face pale from the impact. "Whatever's down there, it's waking up. It's not just the Legionnaires. There's something buried beneath the ice, something ancient, something we've disturbed." Vale didn't need any more confirmation. He knew what had triggered this. The Legionnaires were a weapon, a biological Armageddon, but they were only part of the equation. The real threat was something far older, something that Earth's creators had hidden away, buried under centuries of ice and stone. The pulse beneath them grew stronger, the air charged with a strange, almost magnetic force. From deep below, a massive shadow began to rise, emerging through the shattered ice like some ancient colossus. The tremors intensified, rattling their bones, as if the earth itself was unwilling to let this thing return to the surface. Val's mind raced. "We have to get out of here, now," he shouted, grabbing Kira's arm and pulling her toward the cliffside. Relkin fumbled with the comm device, trying to adjust the frequency, but it was no use. The electromagnetic interference was overwhelming. Their signal was already cutting out. The shadow beneath the ice grew larger, and with it came a sound, a deep rumbling roar that seemed to come from the very core of the planet. The storm shifted violently, the snow swirling in unnatural patterns, and Vale watched as the earth cracked open, revealing massive, ancient machinery buried beneath the surface. It was a city. No, a tomb. And in the center of it all, a towering figure began to rise. It was humanoid, but its features were obscured by a thick metal exoskeleton that gleamed with an otherworldly sheen. Massive arms, like living weapons, shifted with terrifying precision, and glowing lines ran across its surface like veins of pure energy. "What the hell is that?" Kira whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Vale's jaw clenched. I think it's what we were supposed to wake." Relkin stared, transfixed by the sight. "It's not just a machine. It's alive." The creature's eyes, glowing with a malevolent blue light, scanned the horizon. And then, as if it had been waiting for something, it activated. The ground shook violently, and a shockwave of energy pulsed outward, knocking them back onto the ice. The legionnaires, who had been advancing toward them, suddenly froze in place. Their movements stuttered, as if they were no longer in control. Vale struggled to get to his feet, his heart pounding. This isn't just a war. It's an invasion. The towering entity moved with terrifying precision, its movements faster than Vale could comprehend. It was huge, far larger than any human or machine. It was a relic of a time long past, a creature capable of destruction on an unimaginable scale. Behind them, the legionnaires stirred again, but now they seemed to be subservient to the creature. They fell in line behind it, waiting for its command, as if they were nothing more than drones in a greater machine. And then the realization hit Vale with the force of a freight train. The legionnaires weren't the primary weapon. They were simply servants of something far more powerful. The tomb they had uncovered was not just a relic. It was a grave, holding something that was never meant to be disturbed. "We're out of time," Kira yelled, looking at the towering figure now striding toward them. "That thing is waking up, and it's not gonna stop." "We need to move," Vale said, his voice strained with urgency. "We can't fight this." Relkin gave a nod. "I don't know where we'll go, but we need to survive long enough to send a warning." With the legionnaires at their backs and the colossal, ancient weapon ahead, Vale made one final decision. "We run." The storm raged, the echoes of war reverberating through the ice, as the crew sprinted into the desolate wilderness, hoping against hope that they could outrun the dawning nightmare of Earth's forgotten past. But as the dark figure of the ancient machine loomed over them, it was clear that the battle for Earth was just beginning.